Hey everybody, we are officially live. I'm so excited to dive into another episode of our pre-symposium panel as we lead up and ramp up for our executive symposium on Thursday, December 5th in Dallas, Texas, on the topic how to achieve effective cross-functional communication and collaboration. So what a pre-symposium panel is, it's a bringing together of three attendees of the executive symposium to share their thoughts, their insights, and their knowledge and wisdom on the topic itself, and get everybody who's thinking about attending the event some insight about the event and potentially excited about coming to the event itself. So, Ryan, Brad, Bill, thanks for being here. Ryan, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm named Ryan Snellings, 25 years in the medical device biotech space. Last role was a global VP at a bioscience company in San Diego. And currently just started my own leadership development coaching consultant business over the last few months. So happy to be here.
Very cool. Bill, how about you?
Floyd and the CIO for a mid-stage startup in software as a service for cyber risk management. And I've been in technology for the last 40 years. And I've been the CIO, CTO of various companies in financial services, retail, and software as a service. And been doing that for about 25 years.
Very nice. And Brad, how about you?
Hey, good to see everyone this morning. I'm Brad Thiboult. I've been in sales, mostly contact centers, sales and service for the better part of 20 years, most of that in leadership and also running special projects for those types of companies. Much like Ryan, I'm actually right in the middle of launching a consulting business as well.
Very cool. My name is Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder of Ambition in Motion. At Ambition in Motion, our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they're there, their expectations meet reality, and when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders. We believe leaders create the experiences employees have while at work, and we create technologies and communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. And one of the ways we build community is by having these executive symposiums, by bringing senior leaders from organizations around, in this case, the DFW area, together to discuss their thoughts on how to achieve effective cross-functional communication and collaboration. So let's dive right into the topic, guys. So how to achieve effective cross-functional communication and collaboration. One of the biggest issues that I've observed a lot recently, but I think it's probably been going on for many, many years, is inconsistent communication from the C-suite to different teams within the organization that ultimately creates frustration, strife, and infighting because there was inconsistent communication. So a classic example is you get a CEO who says, you know what, it would be a great idea if we had an app. What do you think about that, fellow CTO? CTO is like, we got a whole roadmap. We got a bunch of other things going on here. I mean, we can put an app in, but I mean, is this priority A, or is this kind of like thinking about it down the line, maybe in a year from now? And the CEO is like, I don't know. Let's tease it out. Maybe we get some traction, and then we'll prioritize it if we think it's a good fit, and if we don't, we'll kick it down the line. Well, the tech team starts working on this new app, let's just say. Well, the product team is like, where did this app come into play? The CEO never told me about an app. We've been working on our core software product that we've been trying to, launch and put out there. And this is not at all in line with what we've got going on. And it creates some infighting. The CTO and the tech team and the software devs are like, I don't know, my hands are tied. Like the CTO, who was told by the CEO, told me that we need to create an app. And now all of a sudden we're going to start diverting our attention to that. And the product team's like, well, that's not what we heard. And all of a sudden you get infighting. So in your experience, what have you found to be an effective way to create clear communication across the organization, especially when change is presented by the CEO or the board or a senior executive in the organization?
You guys mind if I take that one? Jump in,
Brad.
Yeah, I think the few ideas that come to mind that are the opposite of what you just explained. How do you fix this, or what does good look like is probably your trust and transparency, right? And in the story you told, I don't know that the CEO is necessarily not being transparent. They're spitballing ideas, right? And I think a lot of times that's where it gets mixed up as you kind of go down the hierarchy is, well, who do I tell what? Is this really a plan yet? Is this a project we need to start? Or is it just an idea? And I think that I've seen, interestingly, in both startups and well-established 200-year-old, Fortune 100 companies, this lack of a organized communication plan. And so those are like the two big ones. And then the other one I think is just relationships, right? Like if you strive to build good relationships, you're probably going to get better or stronger lines of communication. And I think those are kind of your three areas that make those things work better. But again, I have seen it in the smallest companies, and I've seen it in some pretty large companies. It's an issue everywhere for sure.
Yeah, I agree with Brad. And but I think one of the things is that we as leaders and as a leadership team in an executive leadership position, we make assumptions, right? We assume that the CEO talked to the product, head of product, and that they talked to the CFO, and that there's budget allocated for this, and that they talked to, so my first assumption is that they haven't, right? Don't make any assumptions about who knows about this. So that's where you got to come back with your CEO and says, hey, have you talked to Joe in product? Have you talked to, the CFO? What's the plan here? What is the business objective? What is it you want to actually accomplish with this? And if we can clearly articulate what that business objectives are, or the multiple objectives, but maybe it's just one. He wants an app and he wants to be cool. Okay. But how does that affect revenue? How does that affect our reputation? How does that improve the experience for our customers? And those are all questions that you ask, because you can't assume that he's made those conclusions yet unless he's clearly articulated that. So I just go into any conversation I have with a CEO or whomever it may be, and I don't make any assumptions about who they have communicated with or what they have articulated as a business objective. And once we have a clear objective, then you can start outlining, okay, well, now we need to pull in this person. Now we got to pull in this person. And let's have a meeting and discuss these objectives so we're all on the same page. And then we can then outline what our plan is.
Yeah, fair points.
Yeah, and I think I would just add on to that, because obviously, we're talking quite a bit at a high level, but I think a lot of the miscommunication or kind of the conflict comes as it gets further down within the organization. So I think at some of the lower levels, you got to make sure, of course, you define roles, make sure responsibilities are clear, especially because you're dealing with different departments. So you got to kind of help them understand, why we're doing what we're doing, what their contribution to the project is. And then, of course, once you've started the project and you have some wins, you got to kind of celebrate those collaborative wins as well, just to kind of keep that momentum going.
Almost like a PR campaign.
Let me just add one more thing in there, is that in the absence of information, people will fill in the blanks based on their perspective.
Yeah.
Very true.
Okay. And if you don't believe that they have the right perspective, then they're going to fill in the blanks with that perspective, and they're going to go down their own path. So the more information you can share and the more communication you provide, the less white space there is, and everybody's going to be marching to the same, set of music.
Yeah. To your point, it's definitely a vacuum that will be filled quickly if you don't start kind of communicating. Because once they hear that first little speck of info of this new project, things start to accelerate pretty quick.
You guys are bringing up really good points, but Bill, I love what you said about don't make assumptions. Leaders make assumptions. Don't make assumptions. I think that's so critical, because even with Brad and Ryan, what you're saying, Brad mentioning trust and transparency, it's all about the relationships, and Ryan saying hey, there's a lot of times conflict further down in the organization, celebrate the wins. All that's good and all, but for any of this to actually work, objectivity needs to get to the top. Because we know objectivity diminishes the higher anyone goes in any organizational hierarchy. Like, you move up from director level to VP to C-suite. Once you're in the C-suite, if I got a vacation coming up in January and December, I'm not trying to challenge my CEO telling him that this is a really dumb idea. I'm not here to put my family's vacation at risk because I think the CEO's, baby idea of building an app is stupid and not aligned with anything at all that we're trying to do. But I'm not going to tell him that, because my family vacation is more important than me telling him, my CEO, that his idea is dumb. And so that's the issue that like we run into is how do you bubble that up to a CEO? How do you give your CEO that objectivity so then he or she can actually be like, oh my gosh, I totally like didn't realize that I didn't communicate the need for an app to everybody else in the organization and why that's important. Because if you don't do that and the CEO doesn't do that, and let's just face it, a CEO is busy. He or she's got a lot of things on their plate. They're working on strategy, maybe raising capital, maybe they're trying to close a big deal. Who knows what they're working on? They got a lot of things going on. They may not have realized, oh my gosh, I told the CTO and the subsequent software developers to go out and build this app. Well, the product team's been waiting for the developers to build this other thing that they've been working on. Now the product team thinks, Bill, to your point, that if you don't have a perspective or perception, they're going to think this tech team's a bunch of lazy jerks who don't get their work done on time, not realizing that these guys are working night and day to now not only do their basic tasks, but also get an app done. And they're exhausted. They're thinking they're lazy and everybody's frustrated. And a little bit of communication could have been a way to solve all that. How do you bubble that up to your CEO in a way that actually drives a change and doesn't get you fired?
Very carefully. Yeah, I think in my opinion, in my experience, it's when you're talking to the CEO, C-suite period, most senior leaders, it's about the ROI. What are you putting into it? What are you going to get out? What is the timeline? And delivering the right data the right way, right? So if you have that data and it essentially says, boss, this is a terrible idea, you could share that. And I think your other data points could be in some form of survey, like anonymize the survey. But I think if you have your ROI and related information or data to hand over, and then you have a survey from people in the know or folks that are a little lower in the organization, and it all says the same thing, you don't have to be the person to say it. You could just, be a part of the group that takes in that information and shares upward, and then I think it kind of smooths it over a little bit.
And make sure you got kind of group buy-in. You hopefully you have a strong leadership team, so it's not just you going back to the CEO. The entire leadership team hopefully has gotten together, collaborated, realized, hey, this may not be a great idea, or it is a great idea, and then you go as a team back with the feedback. You don't want it to come off like you're just the one kind of disagreeing or thinking it's not a good idea. You got to help the CEO understand, like, hey, we've met with everyone. These are the challenges. Here's some pros and cons. Now let's make a decision going from there. But you're going to need a strong leadership team because typically your CEO is pretty strong and they're busy and kind of set with the path they want to go in. So you got to make sure you've got your data points in order to have that conversation.
Used to do work and they like to say that in God we trust, but all others bring data. So you've got to inform, right? You've got to provide the full picture. So and again, this is a part of vetting out the plan and having information and the CEO's, he's the CEO for a reason, and he's going to make a good business decision as long as you present the data, the information to the CEO in a thoughtful and informative way. And it's going to be his idea or her idea that this is not a very good idea, and they'll come to that conclusion on their own.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, and again, if you provide the information and the CEO says, do it anyway, get it in writing.
Yeah. I was going to ask that, like, what do you do in that scenario? I've been there, and that is not an easy scenario to deal with when, most folks agree this is not the direction we should be going. And yet that, one or two folks in power say, no, do it anyway. And yeah, you're right. Get it in writing.
Yeah. Document.
Let's give our CEOs a little grace here because they may know it's a bad idea. But what we're oftentimes neglecting to acknowledge is the pressure a board may place on their CEO to act in a certain way. Some egregious examples could be you got a family board that, the grandkids of the original founder from 100 years ago are now on the board, and they're the ones who say, we need to have an app. They are not in the business whatsoever. They got no idea how this industry works. They've got no clue as to what the heck is going on here, but they're putting pressure on their CEO, that thumb, right down on them to make an app happen. The CEO's like, this is stupid. This doesn't make any sense. But the board seats are like, hey, if you don't make this app, we're gonna find a new CEO that will make us an app. And you're like, we're making an app.
We're gonna get a cool.
But that's a silly example of just pure incompetence. But more recently, you see a lot more examples of layoffs happening and scenarios where, let's say, a company's profitable, but they're like super profitable, and the board looks at that and say, we want our profitability metrics to be like this, and currently we're at this. We're still profitable, but they're not here. And so let's say if I'm leading a team and now I'm told I'm going to have to lay off half my team because even though we were profitable, we weren't profitable enough. That's a little bit that's a black eye. That's a tough pill to swallow because you're like we're making money. Things seem to be going good. Like why would we like we I know the books. I know we're profitable. What else could we possibly try to achieve? And the CEO's like probably in agreement, but also saying, hey, the board's putting this pressure on me. My hands are tied, even though we spend all this time hiring, training, developing all these employees. We got to let them go. And how do you go about getting on the same page when it comes to that sort of communication? Because one of the biggest challenges you observe is an us versus them mentality. CEO could say the board sucks and they're throwing me under the bus and making me do this thing, or the CEO stands with the board. And then the next level down said the CEO sucks and they're making me do all these things. Like it's easy to create rife between organizational like hierarchies and like I guess rungs on the ladder uh, when they're asked to do things that they don't want to do. How do you go about avoiding that us versus them mentality?
I don't know if you can avoid it. I mean, obviously, some of what you're talking about, you're talking about some cultural challenges, especially at a executive level, which is really tough because then that tends to kind of wind down to the rest of the org. But I do think you have to kind of hold your stance when you think or know something's wrong, whether that puts you in the firing line or not. I don't think you make I don't think you do something that you know is wrong just because it's kind of being pushed down. Because, like you're constantly telling your employees and helping them understand the why of things, you also need to understand the why of things and understand what's right or wrong. So I think too many times we get stuck in this world of, well, the board said so, the CEO said so. And unfortunately, we're seeing there's they're not always right. You can't just run with it. You've got to have some pushback. And again, it goes back to hopefully you have a strong leadership team at a little bit of a lower level. So you've got some other people kind of supporting you in that pushback. And it's tough because you're kind of putting yourself at risk, but I'd rather put myself at risk than put the rest of my team at risk and have them working on something that just makes no sense.
If you can't explain, if you don't understand the why, you can't explain the why, then anything you say lacks credibility. Okay? And the why may not be a good message. It may be we've got to increase profits by 15%, and we got to figure out a way. So help your team understand that that's the objective for whatever reason. Okay, the board said we've got to increase profitability by 15%. We need to figure out on our team how we contribute to that and what are the best alternatives that don't impact or don't hurt the business or maybe even help the business to contain that objective. That way your team, at least your leadership team, is bought in. It may mean that they may have to let some people go. But they have to be part of the solution as opposed to just coming down with dictating, hey, we got to cut 50%. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to do it, and just get it done. Because when people feel like they don't have contribution to the solution, they don't have buy-in.
Yep.
And that's when you get quiet quitting and resistance and disruption.
That's the culture breakdown.
Yeah, really good point on the involving folks, right? Involving them in any decision is always going to get a better result overall. Everything we're talking about, tough decisions to be in. We talk about the messages coming down from the board through the different levels, and you have to let people go. I've been on both sides. I'm guessing most of us here have been at some point on both sides of that decision. And I always find that I think Bill said it earlier, having the why, kind of the same as delivering information up and down. The messaging is a little different, but having a why that you can share that makes sense, and then having the data to back that, I've found generally makes it a little bit easier of a conversation. So at least if you're having a hard conversation with someone, they have some level of understanding versus, if you're not transparent, if you don't share the why, those can build some long-term resentment.
I like it. I got holes to poke.
I think, Garrett, you brought up a lot of scenarios
Yeah,
here
sorry,
that are kind of on the negative side.
Sure.
But oftentimes we forget that it's just as important that when there's a good message and there's things to be, happy about. Hey, we met our numbers for this quarter, or, we got some recognition, or whatever the situation may be, that it shouldn't just always be communication about, negative things, right? It's celebrate the wins. I think Ryan brought that up. Celebrate the wins along the way, so that you're building up a bank, right? Your emotional bank, and your commitment, and your satisfaction of your employees. The banking, you're storing up the goodwill, so that when you come to them with something that's not so good, they can draw upon that. Hey, this is a bad thing, but I like working here because of all these other things that we've had experienced. So sometimes it's not about just communicating, what's going on today. It's about building up that culture, that buy-in, so that you can get through the rough times.
That's true, but I think there's a fine line there, because my biggest gripe with a lot of executive teams is toxic positivity. This whole notion of, you know what I'm talking about? Like this,
Yeah.
hey, we had a down quarter. Hey, we're still kicking, but we're riding through. We got this and whatever. And the team's like, sure, whatever. Okay, cool. Yeah, we got this. Yeah. And then you got another quarter and it's a down quarter. And the CEO goes, oh, we got this. Hang tight, everybody. Keep pushing. And then the next quarter, down quarter, massive layoffs. I can't believe it. Why did
this come
laid off? And so I think there's a fine line of, like, I think the critical component, Bill, that you brought up is the aspect of incorporating the team in the solution and the transparency about the problem. Because if we're not transparent about what the problem is and we don't incorporate the team in the solution, we're showing that we don't trust our team. Because you're so right. You're so right. We need to be incorporating our team in the solution, but so often, if anybody feels surprised by a layoff, that's an indicator that we probably didn't incorporate our team in the problem to solve it in the first place. Because if you're surprised, that means you didn't know that the problem existed, more likely than not. Whereas if you were told, like, hey, our profitability numbers need to be this, we're currently sitting at this, I'd love to rally the team together to see if we can identify some operational efficiency so we can get to this point, and allow the team to actually maybe come up with some solutions versus not telling anybody, giving them the whole keep riding high, you got this, and then boom, we didn't hit our numbers. We're gonna have to slack the team 30%, and we'll be back to our profitability numbers. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
First ideas always come from the bottom up. The people that are in the middle of it, day in and day out, that are customer facing, whether it's your sales reps, your field service engineers, the people that are getting direct feedback every single day tend to have the best ideas. I don't know how many times I've gone into a meeting and thought I had this great list of these ideas, and then I leave the meeting and I realize none of the ideas we came out of were mine. It always ended up coming out being from the team. So I think you guys are kind of spot on. You've got to get that feedback, because there's going to be a gold nugget in there somewhere. So if you don't have that two-way communication, I think you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunity to fix things that are a challenge and improve upon things that are already going well.
Yeah, good points. Garrett, I think you nailed it earlier. You said, I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember exactly what you said, but it's a fine line, right, between being transparently positive with your folks as a leader, but also that like toxic positivity, and I think again, if you have a good relationship with your folks and they understand you, where your heart and your mind is as far as the business is concerned, you can share that positivity. But I think also you have to really include in there the real, okay, here's what's going on. Here's what we think we can do. Let's get positive about this. And here are the 5 action steps that we can take to get there. Then you can rah, right? You can rally the team around because you've been transparent. It's not just let's get back on the horse and keep going. It's here are the 4 steps you need to take to get back on the horse and make it run faster. We believe this can be done. Let's work together. What ideas do you have? An approach like that is going to be much better than just the constant, woo, we got this. Let's go. We're going to be just fine. And then, when you have those transparent conversations, to what you said, you're not going to have those big surprises. This reminds me so much. One of the things on my mind was like spin, right? And sometimes we're the one that has to spin, and sometimes we're the one that, the story is getting spun to us. But, I get, again, I go back to that resentment, right? Like, I think everybody at a certain point, whether they say it or reflect it or not, gets a little bit of resentment when you don't just get the truth, right? So I think that's really important, is that transparency piece.
Ryan, you brought up this point earlier.
Comment, Brad. That's good.
Yeah, jump in, Ryan.
No, I'm just saying, Brad's comment about spin, that's good. It goes both ways. So I'm stealing that comment.
I am not a fan. If I wasn't clear, not a fan of spin. I'm just tell me like it is, and I'll tell you like it is, and we'll make a plan, and we'll get where
Absolutely.
we need. Don't feed me the nonsense,
Yeah.
Ryan, you brought up a point earlier that I'm intrigued to learn more about. I mean, you mentioned that, hey, at some point you just got to stand up for what you think is right, even if it's disagreement with the organization. I also think it's easier to say when you're the CEO of your own company. But when you're actually in it, though, it's a little bit tougher to stand up for what you believe in. What are some tips or tricks that you would have for a director, VP level, whatever leader who gets a directive from their CEO, from their executive team to do something where they're like, I don't get it, I don't understand. Is there a way that they can go about standing up for what they believe in without getting fired, or should they start beefing up the resume?
Well, I mean, I don't think, if there isn't a challenge or a potential for negative feedback, then you're not really necessarily showing leadership, right? Like if you're not worried about any repercussion when you're pushing back, anyone can do that. It's easy. It's the whole, courage without the absence of fear kind of comment you hear out there. It's unfortunately, once you're in a leadership position, if you're truly leading, that's your responsibility when the times are tough or there's a very tough decision. Now, hopefully, again, it goes back to culture. Hopefully, you have a culture where you can push back. And ideally, we're not talking about someone that's always pushing back, because then you got that reputation and that's a problem. But if you strongly feel a certain way about something, have that discussion. But you should seek to clarify, because for one, we all have our own bias and we can misunderstand, what the actual message is. But if you seek to clarify and you fully understand and you still have disagreement, you've got to be willing to push back. And unfortunately, depending on what kind of company you're in, I guess there could be some repercussions, but hopefully people respect the fact that you're open with your feedback. And at the end of the day, if you do push back and you get termed just simply for disagreement, it's probably somewhere you don't want to be anyway, right? Because I know I don't want to change my kind of morals or my standards or what I expect from people just to keep a job, because then that tells me that company's probably short-sighted anyway. So sometimes it's a blessing in disguise. You may end up somewhere else. I mean, hopefully that's not the case, but it happens, right? We've all been in that situation. We've all had to go somewhere else in order to kind of flourish, and that's okay. But at least you feel good about standing your ground and doing what's right.
That's tough, though. I mean, you got a mortgage, you
got hard. Yeah.
You got a vacation coming up Walt Disney World with those kids, it could be tough to put that all at risk because
Leadership, though, right? I mean, if you're going to be in a position of leadership, that's your role. You have a team that,
I
not
think
to
you're
say
right.
protecting your team, but you need to show your team what's right. And it is hard. If it wasn't, then everyone could do it, right? Everyone would be directors and VPs and CEOs and whatnot. It takes a lot. It takes some courage.
And it does boil down to culture, because if you're in a culture where it's basically command and control and dictatorial, and you're just expected to do what you're told to do, then you're just a manager, right? And you need to understand the difference. But if you're part of a leadership culture and the leadership team is bought into and they're invested in that culture, then they're going to actually solicit feedback and pushback, because they need to understand all the different ramifications of the decisions they're making. And a lot of decisions are made with a lot of ambiguity because people aren't willing to offer their opinions. Okay. But the best way to get your message across is don't give your opinion, inform what you know to be true, and allow them then to make decisions based on that information. Okay. And that's not pushback. That's just informing. Right. So try to keep your opinions out of it, or at least have your opinions bolstered by information.
Bill, that's a really good point. And it kind of comes back to the point you brought up about leaders make assumptions, don't make assumptions. Would you find that an exercise of, like, let's say when a CEO implements a new directive, would you find an exercise to be healthy, non-controversial, but at the same time helping that CEO gain objectivity be a simple concept of going to that CEO and saying, like, hey, what assumptions do we have about what we just laid out here? What assumptions, like, what did we directly communicate? What do we assume will be communicated, but maybe didn't officially communicate? Is that sort of exercise something you think would be, have you done that before with the CEO? And if not, do you think that would be healthy to kind of help that CEO get up to speed as to, oh my gosh, maybe I need to tell this to the product team, or maybe I need to tell this to finance or HR or operations or whatever?
Asking a lot of questions, getting clarifications, being devil's advocate, right? What could go wrong? And have you thought about this? Those are all healthy exercises for basically trying to get all perspectives around the an objective and an initiative to formulate what questions are going to come from other people within your organization. And so that when those questions come, you already have the answers.
Brad, Ryan, any thoughts on that assumptions exercise, or that just playing devil's advocate, asking follow-on questions to your CEO to get all on the same page?
Yeah, I think just like the conversation we had, a few moments ago, it can be a dual-edged sword, one of those needles that you're going to thread very carefully. Yes, I do think it could be very helpful, but you kind of get in that same space. If that's not already a part of your culture, what's going to happen when you're the person to go recommend that to the CEO? They're going to immediately think, well, you must think something I'm doing is wrong. Let's talk about it. And then you have some other decisions you have to make on how you're going to approach that, right? And then if you try to rally the troops and build consensus, a level or two below that in the hierarchy before you go have that conversation, now it just looks like you're starting a coup. So would it be healthy? Absolutely. But you've got to find you got to find the path to get there.
You better make sure your pushback is well supported with data and analysis and a lot of conversation. You better make sure you're right.
Yeah. And, to go back a few moments ago in conversation, you might also want to just go ahead and get that resume, nice and prepped.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think the case is at this level of the game, right? Like, your resume is pretty much always prepped anyway in case one of these things go sideways, because it just happens so often these days.
And my guess is this, if you are in this kind of situation where you're really worried about providing feedback, you already know there's a cultural issue and you're
Really
on the
looking
fence anyway.
100% right in my experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, maybe, but I
You
mean,
just have to decide whether or not that's a culture you want to be part of.
Yeah. And is it worth the paycheck really?
And assuming you try to influence it for the better, right? Assuming you put some time and effort into trying to help create a better culture, fix the culture. I definitely think you owe it to yourself and to your team and to the company to put in that effort and try to guide things in the right direction. But a couple of years goes by and you don't see it going anywhere, then yeah, you got to make some tough decisions.
yeah. No, that's interesting. I mean, culture really is set by the tone at the top, but felt by everybody throughout the organization. And if you feel like you've got someone at the top of the organization that's a boulder that's impossible to move, then it can be really hard to make any change because the feelings you're having are probably the feelings that everyone else has. But when you got those golden handcuffs, it can be hard to break free from them even though like hindsight 2020 and armchair expert over here, you'd be better off leaving a toxic work environment to pursue a different opportunity than to stay in a toxic work environment hoping that it might get better.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
Been there. Agreed.
they're gonna be hard. Well, guys, this has been a really good pre-symposium panel. I feel like we covered a lot of ground here. If you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I'd love to meet these three great leaders, come to our executive symposium on December 5th, on Thursday, from 5 to 8 p.m. in Dallas. Topic is how to achieve effective cross-functional communication and collaboration. Everybody, thanks for your time. Have a good rest of your day.